Welcome to the Art of Procurement, the official podcast of the Catalyst Co-community. And our purpose is to enhance the impact of procurement by elevating the discussion, one conversation at a time. Here at Art of Procurement, Catalysts come together every single week to share their challenges, ideas, successes, and perspectives on the business of procurement. Welcome to this week's Art of Procurement, and I'm your host, Philip Eidson, and today's episode was recorded last month at the SIG Fall Summit with my good friend, Antonio Humphreys. Antonio is Senior Manager of Global Procure to Pay at Adobe in San Jose in California, and Antonio is actually a returnee to the Art of Procurement. He previously joined me last year, back on episode 157, when we discussed the marketing category, and also some general procurement organizational development topics. Today, we focused on Antonio's experience in managing teams with a global and virtual environment, including his insights into fostering a sense of team across borders. And so I started our conversation just by asking Antonio for his takeaways from the SIG event that we actually recorded the podcast from.
I think when you come to a lot of the SIG Summits, they're always very entertaining. You're always looking at a lot of the personalities with SIG, you know. Love everybody here. You know, it's one where, you know, you feel it's almost coming home to your sourcing procurement
you feel
family.
Like you're part of family is a really good word.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So it's almost like coming home. So if you get to do it, you know, once, twice a year, that's what I always, my first impression. Beyond that, it's always, you know, kind of looking for those main themes of kind of what's the latest and greatest. Yeah. I know we've been talking a lot about still kind of the value delivery and generation, and what is that going to mean next, right? What is the 2.0, 3.0 kind of version of that? We've been talking a lot 2020, 2025, what is procurement going to look like? Yeah. And I think that's the part that everybody's trying to figure out, because we've kind of exhausted a lot of the normal traditional things of what we do to kind of support the business. But I think where is it that we continue to drive and say, hey, we're going to be the innovators, right? We're the ones that are going to come with those business solutions to other units, right, within all of our organizations. And that's where I think we have the opportunity to say, hey, we can take a lot of our consulting, a lot of our analytics kind of backgrounds, and solve problems in other parts of the business, just like we've done in procurement for a long time. Yeah,
I think what's really important is that while we don't necessarily know, we don't have crystal balls to say this is what 2020 or 2025 is going to look like. And in some cases, you go back to reports in 2005 and 2010, and they say exactly the same thing as some of the things that we see today. I think what's important is to have an opinion. Is have an opinion on what the future of procurement is going to look like, because then you can start planning accordingly. Now, it may be that doesn't come to pass, but at least educating yourself on the possibilities, starting to do things to prepare yourself, means that at least you're not going to be kind of standing watching procurement change from the sidelines. You're a part of its evolution.
Totally agree. If we're not being the natural innovators as part of what everybody else is driving on the technology side, from an HR perspective, right? What are all the things from an organizational design and that type of thing? We need to be part of that conversation.
Yeah. So I think it's a year or so since we last spoke on the show. I just wondered, for context, if you could update listeners and perhaps share for listeners who didn't catch the first time we had a chat on what your role is at Adobe.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. Yeah. I've been talking to a lot of people in the industry about Art of Procurement.
I'm a
big fan.
Thanks.
And I've been trying to make sure that everybody, you know,
word of mouth. Anybody who's listening who can help, word of mouth is what spreads it.
Of course, as it always does. Number one rule in marketing. So when we think about my role specifically, so I manage our marketing and sales sourcing vertical. That's a lot of money that we spend specifically on the corporate marketing side at Adobe, both at a local level based out of our headquarters in San Jose, California, and then a lot of what we're doing around the globe. The other side of my team is also our global procurement organization, which are based across lots of different markets and geographies, which is always a lot of fun. That's always my extra passion besides marketing. It's always just anything international and global. So that's a bit of what I'm doing these days.
So how do you define procurement? Because it's interesting to me that in different organizations we define it in different ways. Sometimes we talk about procurement to mean collectively everything that we work in, from strategic sourcing through to procurement operations. In other organizations, procurement really means procurement operations. So sure. What does procurement mean at Adobe?
Yeah, so when we look at our organization, it's technically procure to pay. Mm-hmm. So it's basically everything soup to nuts. If we're thinking strategic sourcing to what we'd say is more kind of the general, I'm not going to say tactical, I'm just going to say kind of broader procurement when we're looking at just varying levels of risk and spend, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then we get into some of the other elements that we manage around T&E, obviously travel and expense, and all the way to our accounts payable functions as well. So it's really everything end to end, which is nice. You get that broader visibility of all the puzzle pieces that you're trying to make sure
you can't
kind of
point fingers to blame anybody else either.
Yeah, it's all on us for sure.
What I wanted to talk, you mentioned about the interest in kind of working across different cultures and working geographically. What I wanted to talk about today is actually some of your experiences in doing that, in managing really globally distributed teams, because it can be very challenging, but it could also be really rewarding. It's something that I've always kind of levitated to, because it's just, I really like working with people across the world. If I'm just working with somebody in one country, it's not that it gets boring. It's just very you don't get the different perspectives.
Of course.
So I want to ask this in kind of two different elements. One is from an organizational perspective. Mm-hmm. Second, then I want to go into it from an individual kind of people manager perspective.
Sure.
When we think about organizationally, when you have a global team, how do you bring the team together so it acts as one, as opposed to it being lots of different outposts of individuals, or 2 or 3 people who are all kind of isolated from a core?
Yeah. So it's challenging, because when you're looking at a lot of the time zones, the amount of scope and projects and the complexity of everything that's kind of going on all around the world, you're going to have your maturity is going to be much more evolved in certain markets, obviously less in some others. So it's a combination of all of those variables that, in my mind, yes, it's challenging, but also just makes it fascinating.
Right. When
you think about that, I know you and I, we've talked about kind of our experiences on an international scale. That's just the place where it's just fun to get in there, mix it up, learn about, obviously, the cultures, understand the, just what makes people tick and want to do best in those specific markets. And all the nuances, right, are different. When you look at doing business in Tokyo versus Beijing versus more Western European markets in London and Dublin versus Eastern European markets like in Bucharest where we operate, and then all the way to our 2 major hubs in India as well.
Right. Much
different environments. But I think, to your point, what are some of the things that kind of brings it together? I think really making sure that you're connected, and a lot of the team feeling that you have a vested interest, right? Yeah. You're supporting them from afar. Yeah. So I'm in California, but I have my team, across all these different areas. I'm very connected with them on weekly one-on-ones. Mm-hmm. We have connected staff meetings, right? So that it bring everybody together, obviously in a virtual environment, so that everybody can see each other, on the screen.
In Adobe, you're able to use your own technology as well, aren't you, to bring that together from a video conference perspective?
For sure. Yeah, so that's a luxury that we have, and I would encourage that for anybody. Right, you have to make that investment if you're operating in a virtual global environment.
It makes so much difference, doesn't it?
It's massive. When I can kind of put everybody up on the screen and we can see everybody kind of contributing, and it's a live interaction, very, very real time. Yeah, it makes things that much more effective. So I think it's just a frequent interaction, having those tools, right, to make sure that everybody's connected and visible. And then I think just having, again, that really vested interest in your people, so that they know that you're kind of establishing that trust factor, right? You got to make sure that they know they have your back, even from afar. right?
Yeah.
What are the things that you can do to support them? Because a lot of times there may be 1, 2, 3, people in an office by themselves.
Right.
What is it that you can do to give them that executive coverage, right? Give them that management backing to make sure that they've got everything that they need to help either solve problems that they're facing with the business or just help them, right, individually. So I think those are the things that are really, really important.
Now, do you find that you, because of the time zone difference, it's harder to, one of the things you talked about that I think is important is being there with, so if you're working in an office with somebody, the same office, a member of your team, they have a difficulty with a stakeholder. It's not unusual for you to go and accompany your team member with that stakeholder to provide them some support, in that meeting room together.
Of course.
Something you can't do when they're on the other side of the world and with other time zones as well.
Yeah.
How do you help them in that situation when you are so far away from them?
So a lot of times reality is email, right? So you're going to say, hey, yep, I'll follow up with this person.
Yeah.
I'll back you up and, a lot of those things. So a lot of it just has to be email, right? Good time zones can be plus 12 and a half hours, with India.
I know you get some sleep, so you can't be at every single meeting
not
around
everyone,
the world, every time zone.
Most of them. But I think a lot of it's email, right? But the rest of it is when you can actually be there to support, on that same kind of video technology, you can actually do that. I think a lot of it is travel. When you make the most of that kind of face-to-face, regional, local travel, is just monumental.
Yeah, that makes such a difference. And I know it's an area that a lot of organizations don't necessarily want to invest in because travel is expensive. And then when you start looking at travel policies and business class and, the cost of that rises really, really quickly. But there's nothing more important than actually having face-to-face meetings with your teams on a regular basis wherever they are in the world, because it just builds that kind of trust factor and the feeling that you are there for them rather than posting it in, from even doing it virtually. Yes, it's good to be able to do it virtually, but there's nothing that beats actually being there in person to support them.
Couldn't agree more. When you think of either going to one specific market and being there and meeting with critical business partners, building that kind of pipeline of projects, initiatives, just, building that stronger relationship, however it is, right? Because every market's going to be a little different.
Right.
It does wonders. So I think the budget is definitely worth the investment. It's just a matter of you making that business case to your management to say, hey, look, this is the value that we're going to kind of generate from this. Some of it may be soft, some of it may be hard. It's just a matter of, quantifying that and make sure you can have a good, strong business case. Yeah,
and to me, that really helps with local engagement too. So one of the challenges, we were talking about it off mic before we started actually, is of the differences in local kind of requirements, local processes that, you may be trying to push a global process or a global policy, but you get on the ground, things are very different in regions than what they look at the head office. And so when you have somebody who's a local CFO going to your procurement leader in that country, telling them they want to do something their way, like their country way, versus the global way, it's very, very hard for that person in country to actually push back against that. Being there helps you to try and at least push the message and also figure out where there's some give and take. I don't know if that's been your experience when you're going to the regions and trying to help the local leadership team to recognize the need to kind of align with global processes.
For sure. I think in any global organization that you're in, you're going to have a lot of that operating locally and not wanting to 100% cooperate globally. Right? I'm air quotes. So when you think about that, any sort of air cover that you can provide when you're on the ground to say, hey, of course, this is the headquarter perspective, or hey, this is the company line and the company policy. This is the way we should be operating, more times than not. But then we understand that there's always local nuances, right, that you have to, with local customers, local markets, local traditions. There has to be that balance, right? So I think it's just a matter of understanding that and figuring out how to still, like with us, just still drive the value, right? Drive the value to enable the business to get the results that they need.
How do you, when you look at trying to build relationships with those local leaderships, because what's your approach to kind of doing that when you're on site? Because I think that then gives the local leadership some confidence that even though you are thousands of miles away in California, you actually understand their business.
Yeah. I think it's really emphasizing how dialed in I am with my team to understand what are their pain points, what are the opportunities, where are the areas that we need to be there to support. Yeah. Right. So the fact that I'm really dialed in and knowing their business is just a huge momentum. Right. From that, it's then kind of doing the active listening to figure out, what's next. Right. We always talk about pipeline. So where is it that are there kind of new and next initiatives on their roadmap or where we can potentially support? So it's having that awareness, kind of then saying, hey, we're going to partner with you moving forward. And then I'd say the other piece is just being knowledgeable of kind of that local market and how to communicate in a way that is receptive to them. Yeah. Right. So if it's learning the language, even if it's just small little things, hello, goodbye, thank you, in all those local markets, business cards, when you're learning about all the nuances in operating into Tokyo versus India, when everything is very family-like in terms of approach and in terms of when you're being hosted, what are the things that how you should reciprocate in some of those areas, and where's the formality of establishing those relationships more in the office or potentially a little bit outside the office. Those are all the things that if you come prepared from a cultural perspective, we talk about that as your CQ, your cultural intelligence, super important.
How, when you think about your team locally, when I mean local, I mean in the US, people who are actually interacting with your team members who are based around the world, how can we encourage those people to think with that CQ as well? Because it's a two-way street. It's not just expecting, it's not just for you with your team members, it's for everybody who's interacting with them as well to kind of understand the nuances, the culture of the teams that they're working with.
For sure. Yeah. So one of the things we try and do is introduce training. So we actually just went through a CQ training last week. And we had a few of individuals from our regions who actually led the training. So we talked about nuances of India and Tokyo and China, Eastern, Western Europe, and then actually the U.S. Right. So we're talking about one being obviously an American company and what kind of culture is driven from that, and then what does that mean to then kind of switch your mindset, be open to learning about all of those things and really flexing, that cultural intelligence, just like we flex our emotional intelligence and our normal IQ. It's just, to me, those are the kind of the three new main things that we need to be kind of balancing all the time.
Yeah, and just being aware of it. So at least you can prepare or to look out and just be a little bit more, I guess awareness is the word, because it's easy not to even think about those kind of things.
All the time, because a lot of people are just on autopilot, right? Hey, this is the way I've done it. This is maybe the only thing I've been exposed to. Yeah. But the more that you do get exposed to different areas, the more knowledgeable you get.
Now, I know when I had a team in the US and India, one of the things that I did was a training program on explaining cricket to Americans. So it was like just taking things from one culture that are completely foreign in another market, and just trying to have a discussion where you had where you're just trying to open people's understanding of some of the things that they would talk about that meant nothing to an American. So that was an interesting training course. Another thing, and sometimes this can be a little bit, you end up getting too much information, but just like signing up for alerts to news stories in the particular countries, so that you can actually use those as the basis to start a conversation with a stakeholder or a team member, just shows that you're aware of their own surroundings.
Spot on. Right. So when we think about, first of all, your cricket comment, I've been many times. I still don't understand the rules. I've asked a million times.
I'll have to take you through that training program afterwards.
I'll sign up. Besides cricket and football and everything else, so I'm a big football fan. Anyway. I'm
happy to hear you use the word football
exactly.
as well.
There we go.
Bonus points.
So when we think about, I think the awareness, right? News, all of those things, that just goes into your cultural awareness, right? You want to be aware a little bit of like politics. You want to be a little bit aware of just kind of what's the pulse going on in the country, right? What are some of the things going on? There's always things that people might know about the States, just because there's obviously
you can't avoid it because it's just global news is American news.
It is, right? It's just out there all the time. But a lot of people might not know, hey, this is what's going on potentially in Dublin, Ireland this week. But there's obviously going to be a lot of potential impact to the broader EU with Brexit, and then you're going to talk about what are the things going on with Prime Minister Modi, what's going to be happening in India with a lot of the reform that's trying to happen there. So the more that you kind of come to the table, people will be blown away.
Right.
Like,
You
hey,
immediately
you have an interest.
position yourself as, standing out from the crowd, as just showing an interest and knowing the kind of things to talk about.
Agreed. It builds that immediate rapport.
Right. As you think about individuals, so we talked about managing globally at an organizational level. We talked a little bit about individuals and kind of helping coach your team members, being there for them when they may have challenges with their stakeholders. How do you encourage them to communicate with you in a way that isn't, because it's easy just to say, hey, copy me on everything.
Yeah.
And then you end up with 500 emails a day. So is there an art to how you encourage your teams who are either remote or who are geographically dispersed to actually communicate with you?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, even besides kind of like the business stuff, right? Because one of the things I encourage the team, I said, we're going to use WeChat, we're going to use WhatsApp, like a lot. Right. I said, I just want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what's going on. Let's make this more of like a team, a connected team.
I like that.
So let me know what's going on. Obviously, WeChat's more in the China market, but then with WhatsApp, a lot broader reach. So I encourage the team to say, hey, what was going on this weekend? Hey, we went to this museum. Hey, we went to this event. Hey, here's something kind of cool that I read in the paper. Here's something I saw over here. So it opens up this whole communication channel that a lot of people wouldn't kind of utilize, right? It's more like, hey, this is my buddy or this is my friend, or we're only going to be doing, WhatsApp. But here it's actually we're using to make sure that we are much more connected and interconnected as a true global team. And it makes it that much more personal and, again, more of a kind of a work family.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because as you talk about culture before, different countries have a very different what's the word? It's like the use of technology is like IM is very different in India, in China than it is in the US. And so it's much more familiar in certain countries to use that kind of technology than it is in others. And so you don't just think about, well, in the US we just use email all the time, so let's just use email.
Right.
Actually, using a technology that's more native to those cultures actually really helps, I think, as well.
Agreed. Because everybody can have email overkill.
Right.
Everybody's going to email and copy and CC and BCC and, you name it. I think you have to be more strategic about how you're going to, kind of focus on those ones that are a little bit more priority.
Yeah.
And then from there, how do you then, keep that other pipeline of communication fresh so that everybody stays connected and feels, that they still have their voices heard.
So I know that we're running out of time, so I have just one last question.
Sure.
We talked about how you manage and help to lead teams that are globally distributed. But when you think of your team members, how do you encourage them to build up a level of trust with you so that you're not, because it's impossible, not that you would ever want to micromanage everybody all the time, but even if that was your management style, it's impossible to do that across time zones. So how can they, and I'm asking this because for anybody who's listening who has a manager who is outside of their time zone, on the other side of the world, what can they be doing to make their manager's job easier, to build up that trust so that essentially that they don't feel like you always got to be in touch? Yeah.
I think part of what I do with my team is, again, I try and stay connected. So I hear what are the issues, concerns, just so I understand kind of the pulse of what's going on locally, understand where the areas are that I can help them, kind of just help partner and solve some of the issues. Yep. But beyond that, I've always said it's a pull model, right? Yep. Regardless of whether you're sitting next to me in San Jose or you're sitting 2,000 miles away, you pull me in when you need to. Other than that, you own your business.
Yeah.
your autonomy is 100% in terms of how you want to manage things locally. But if there's anything where you do need that air cover or you need advice or guidance, whatever it is, I'm always accessible. Yeah. So I think that's important because if you're just not, you're radio silent, for several weeks at a time, and then people are going to be like, well, is he really, there for me, he or she? I think that's the part where you just need to make sure that you do stay connected to a degree, make sure that they have that runway, to still manage things locally because they know the business best.
Right.
They're there every day. They know the pressures. They know the stakeholders.
They got people coming to their desk.
They got people coming to their desk, drive-bys all the time. So that's where you have to have trust in them, that they're managing the business to the best of their ability, and wherever you need to provide support, they need to have confidence that you'll be there.
Right. Well, I know we're going to wrap up. The last question, as I say, is always the easy one. If listeners would like to reach out, connect with you directly, what would be a good place for them to find you?
Yeah, of course. So I was on LinkedIn. Yep. So Antonio Humphreys, and my work email, AHUMPHRE@adobe.com. Happy to connect and benchmark. I know, Philip, that I'm always out there.
Always looking for new ideas as well and to connect with folks within the procurement community.
Perfect.
Well, awesome. Well, I'll include those in our show notes for today's episode. Antonio, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.